This is CB Up for Discussion, a podcast series from Community Business where we tackle DE&I and wellbeing hot topics with special guests from across Asia.
This episode discusses sensitive topics related to gender-based violence, sexual harassment, and the societal norms surrounding these issues. The conversation may include personal experiences and stories that some listeners may find distressing or triggering. We encourage listeners to prioritize their well being and take breaks if needed. If you or someone you know is affected by these issues, please seek support from a trusted individual or professional. Your safety and mental health are important.
Today, we are delighted to be up for discussion with Priya. Priya is a dedicated advocate for gender justice with over 23 years of experience, including 15 years in governmental affairs, trade relations, and civic societies, where she has driven strategy, program development, funding, and regulatory initiatives. She has spent over 8 to 9 years in grant making in organizations like Azim Premji Foundation and more recently at Co-Impact. Thank you for being here, Priya, and it's a pleasure to have you. So let's dive in. Priya, I would love to know that I know that you are a founder of Durga, an initiative that empowers women and girls to build agency and address sexual crimes. Could you tell us a little bit more about this and what was your inspiration behind Durga, given your years of commitment to gender justice?
Thank you so much, Bhavya and team, for having me. It's really, really important to have these discussions, and I'm glad you're doing it. So what we do really in Durga is working on prevention of sexual harassment that women, girls, and vulnerable people face in public spaces. And so what we mean by prevention is for us not to be a part of the statistics of I too am one among the million women who get stared at, glared at, whistled at, touched, groped, etc. in a public space. And today, a lot of that culture is normalizing such behavior because staring, glaring, or whistling, even if you go to anybody with authority, would say, "Chua to nahi hai na." So why are you complaining, right? So it's a normalized culture. So one is we want to break that. And we believe that if we don't address this inappropriate behavior at the first stage, then what we do is all the other women empowerment programs are a farce. And what we truly are doing is empowering men to keep doing this repeatedly. And what leads to a stare and glare today becomes touch, grope, severe molestation, abuse, gang rape, etc., and then murder, right? So that's really what we want to stop. And third is we also want to shift the narrative around this because today there's a lot of victim blaming and shaming. If you go tell someone that I was groped in a public place, the first thing you're asked is, why were you in that public space? What time of the day was it? What were you wearing? Why did you even have to think you should be there? So there's a lot of the onus on us as women, girls, and people. And we want to shift that narrative to say that a woman's safety is not a woman's problem, it's everybody's problem, right? And therefore, a large part of our work is focused on getting everyone to be responsible and accountable for our safety, particularly men, because public spaces are designed by men for them, and getting men to understand their entitlements and know how to really sort of co-occupy these spaces becomes critical. So that's one part of your question. The other part was why Durga, right? And I wish there needn't have been a Durga. But however, I think it's a lot of personal experiences, a lot of bottled emotions, a lot of spaces that I would have loved to belong at and be myself at. I haven't done consistently over a period of time, right from my earliest memory of, say, class 7, 8. I remember holding onto my school bag and clutching onto it so that nobody sees my chest and therefore I don't get touched in a bus, right? And why should girls live that life? And I thought I completely got moved when my daughter, who was, I think, 5 years then, told me, and this was really the sort of, we need to do something now, was she told me when she saw a school bus full of boys come in and pass on the road. And she said, oh, okay, there's a boys' school bus, and I don't want to name the schools. And she said, now I need to look down. So I said, why do you need to look down when you see a boys' school bus? And she said, no, that's what our bus teacher has said, because otherwise the boys will stare at us. So you see, at the age of 4 and 5, girls are forced to lose their space, right? Looking down means I've lost that ability and space to look around me, right? It means I don't belong. So these were some of the instances, in any number. I'm sure you have enough and more experiences yourself, Bhavya. So I just felt like armchair activism won't do, and getting on the ground and really shifting and having uncomfortable conversations with people who will stop wanting to be my friends for the rest of their lives is fine, but this needs to get done.
That's amazing, honestly. And that's so inspirational because, like you said, I think there are million instances which I know of, which has happened with me and happened with my friends, where we are so uncomfortable in these spaces, and we have taken the onus on ourselves to ensure that our protection is there without understanding and realizing that it is a societal problem also. And with that, I would like to ask my second question, which is, knowing how important education and awareness is in preventing violence against women, what role does Durga play in that area, especially when you need to educate men or making men more aware?
See, education is a very big word. I wouldn't say we're like educating anybody, right? Like, who are we to educate anyone? But what we really want to highlight is to build sensitivity, to build your lives with respect and empathy. And so therefore a large part of our role, so we work a lot with men and we work a lot with women as well. And so the underlying factor in both spaces is sensitivity building, to really sort of make space for other people where you are, right? So and then to be sensitive about the experiences of other people, to be sensitive for the needs of other people. And I think that's what is a very feminist way to be. And I'm not scared to call myself a feminist. In fact, I'm very proudly saying that I am a feminist, because it's experiential, it's inclusive, and it's right space, right? Right space for everybody. So what we really do when we work with women is to build awareness around. So the sensitivity element is the same for everybody. But when we work with women, we build awareness in women to be able to recognize themselves as equal citizens, right? The women we work with in the informal sector, first of all, hesitate to even tell us their names, because that's not how they're called. Their lives are very different from all our lives. So to first build respect for yourself, understand and be aware that you are a constitutional citizen of this country and you hold all the rights as much as any other cishet man leads and holds today. And so that's the first awareness. And then to get them to recognize the inappropriate behaviors they've been dealing with up until now, the discrimination, the violence, the sexual harassment, and get them to know that all of this is inappropriate. And then finally, knowing it is insufficient, but knowing what to do about it. How do you address it? How do you address it for yourself? How do you address it for others? How do you actually engage and build allyship with one another so you can take up each other's cause? And finally, we also do a lot of mental health support, because survivors of all of what I've just spoken about need mental health support. So that also comes from a very feminist lens of keeping it community-centric, keeping it needs-based, being more proactive in it, etc. So that's the kind of work we do with women. Now, with men, it's a little different, right? The first part of our work is in the awareness side, is to get men to be aware of their privileges and entitlements that are handed over to them intergenerationally on a platter, to say, dude, you belong. Dude, this place is yours. Dude, go and conquer, right? So how do you get out of all of this and say that we all belong? And if I don't make space for another person, then they can never belong. So that's what we need to build as awareness in men. And then we get them to start recognizing how this has been playing out so negatively for the women in their lives, and how patriarchy is toxic, right? We're not against men. We're against patriarchy, right? And so how patriarchy and leads to misogyny, and how the two hand in hand is like a double-edged sword on fire, and how it's so toxic for everybody. So that's the core part of what we do in our work with men. And then we build allyship. So we don't tell men that the whole world is burning and suffering because of you, but we say, how can we all co-create a space where we all thrive together? Today, you seem to be having more power, but can you use that power more positively rather than, more, rather than being a perpetrator, or rather than being discriminatory? So this is the kind of thing we do. And the core part of everything is to be an active bystander, to intervene when you see others in similar situations. Like, how can you advise others, or how can you actually intervene in a difficult situation, and so on. So it's far from, it is education, but I wouldn't say that we educate them. I think we enable this, and that may be a more real thing for us as well to understand and acknowledge.
Yeah. No, I love the fact that you said that you enable them, because that is extremely, extremely true. I also love the fact that you use the word, we work with the community, we work on the ground. That's something which is extremely necessary, because I think we need to acknowledge that the privilege that we have, and people who are working from the who are working on the ground, who are coming from marginalized communities, the intersectional issues are very, very different. So how does Durga as an organization include them into these awareness sessions, this mental health awareness sessions? How do you integrate them into your work?
Sure. I think it's a very important question and very well thought about. And that's where my point of being feminist comes in, right?
Yeah.
So every program of ours is designed keeping the community at the center. And who is this community? The way we identify the community is extremely intersectional. So the most vulnerable person in a community, because of their caste and therefore class, perhaps even religion, economic background, the geographies they come in within, even a city like Bangalore, the opportunities they've been a part of, the kind of jobs that they hold, all of these matter for us. Their disabilities, sexuality, everything matters when you understand who this program should be very impactful for. So if our work does not tick off all of what I'm saying, then it's not being feminist, right? So when we build our outcomes and say that women and girls, so the outcome for us is women and girls should be able to more confidently and comfortably occupy public spaces, right? So therefore, the most important thing there then is, who is this woman we are talking about? Is it Bhavya and Priya? No. Actually, we really don't work with Bhavya and Priya. We only work with a woman who will not be represented by anybody and will not get her voice across anywhere, right? So therefore, all our work is at the community. And how we chose to work with the community is because we're talking about gender justice in public spaces. And interestingly, women don't occupy public spaces. Like, where does Bhavya and Priya occupy public spaces? We only navigate through those and come to work, right? But the ones who actually occupy these public spaces are women in the informal sector, right? So they are your construction workers. They are your street vendors. They are the women in BBMP, the Paura Karmikas, right? The ones who pick up dry waste. So these are women with whom we work, because if a public space needs to be gender just, then these women who use these public spaces for their work need to feel equal. And that is what our core work is. So that's how we sort of, therefore, we cannot design a program if it does not mean anything to this community. So we don't design a program and start to think of, okay, how does this woman get into this program, or how does this individual get into the program? But the crux of the program is only for them. It's about how the rest can get integrated into it.
That's amazing. And I love the fact that you are working with different diverse backgrounds. And I love the fact that you have said words like disability and intersectionality, sexuality. These are very, very, in the most academic way to say it is called double disadvantage, which is
Yeah.
something that we need to actually deep dive and talk about, and we need to talk very openly and talk about their problems. So I'm extremely happy that about the work that you're doing, and it's extremely inspiring for me too. um,
Thank you.
Moving on to my next question. So, at Community Business as an organization, we work with a lot of corporates and large organizations. So, what role does workplace play from safeguarding as well as awareness driving standpoint? And is there an issue that you have seen before in the corporate environment?
I'm going to be very candid, right? So the places where a lot of these issues around inclusion, diversity, lack of safety are most brushed under the carpet are our corporate houses, because they reek of masculinity and patriarchy and colonialism, right?
Mm,
All like just sort of tied and braided together with the best flowers and decorated, ready to go for a wedding. That's what corporate houses essentially have become, unfortunately, for people. And this very same people who actually bring wealth into the corporate houses, right? So what and I've heard so many things, because we also sit in posh committees of organizations of corporate, and trying to really genuinely see that the posh act or the law means something for women in the workspace. Because we're talking about a time when the female labor force participation rate keeps falling. It gets worse and worse. We were discussing just before this conversation about what it means in agriculture, what the pandemic has done to people.
mhm.
Many people have lost jobs, but women have lost jobs in an irreversible way, right? And
Absolutely.
therefore, it's very important to embed corporate or workspace values around what it would mean for the most vulnerable person, similar to the way we embed our programs around what it means to the most vulnerable person outside of a building. Corporates need to do the same on what it means for the most vulnerable person inside the building, right? And ensure consistently that they are well represented, or they have a good idea of who are their employees and what are their backgrounds coming from, and therefore gender, caste, disabilities, everything matters, right? But do we do that right now, or we don't? Because for me, I feel very uncomfortable having a gender agenda within inclusion, right? Like, why would you include me? I'm a woman and I've always belonged. Like, why are you putting me in your inclusion agenda? This place belongs to me as much as it belongs to you. However,
Absolutely.
we are in an inclusion agenda, or a DEI agenda of an organization, because the organization is so masculine, right? Okay, so we're all men here. It's this old boys club. Let's just get some women into it to do some, I don't know what, balancing. And most of the times that balancing means, can you have a prettier smile? Can you dress better? And you go and give the flowers when the VIP comes, or you cut the birthday cake after the birthday person has cut it, or whatever, right? It's frills. I think
Yeah.
till corporates change that culture, we will continue to keep dropping off the female labor force like dandruff, right? And that should
Yeah.
not happen. When will it not happen is when you look at us as people, when you look at
Mm,
us as people with potential, and give us all that is required so that we can thrive, because I know we can, right? And that's what really needs to be built and embedded in corporate. But one of the other stumbling blocks here is, it's not like, I know, Bhavya, you and I, when we get up and get ready to go to work, and when you came to do this big show for you, and I'm coming and sitting on the same big show for me, we need to
mm,
think about 20 other things, right? It's not just prepping for the show and coming. I would have had to do a lot of work at home. I would have had to worry about what I'm going to wear, because I would have to worry about who I'm going to come across on the way. It's about, is my cleavage shown? Is my legs seen? Am I sounding provocative? All of that we need to battle with and then come and do the show. But most men will just get up, get dressed in whatever they would want to, and come and do the show. So
exactly.
unless we look at the intersectionality even there and build our workspaces to acknowledge that,
Yeah.
we will not be able to really sort of say, yes, women have arrived and moved forward and moved ahead in the workspace.
Mm,
There will always be 4 examples in one company and 2.5 examples in another company, and then blank, right?
yeah.
And safety becomes an even more critical part. So after all of this, we hear post Me Too that corporates would say, मुझे women को hire ही नहीं करना है क्योंकि वो मेरे पे Me Too कर देगी. क्या वो Me Too क्या, like, is it some throwing a dart at you or something? Or they'll take leave for pregnancy, or they'll take leave for menstruation or whatever, and just sort of, put people away in margins. Then you're not creating an environment where you get the best talent to be economically sound even. So yeah.
That's very, very wonderfully put. And I think the 3 points that you said just hit the mark. I mean, I have seen it happening in so many organizations myself. It's amazing. My next question to you is, what are your hopes for the future regarding gender justice in India, and how can individuals and communities contribute to this vision?
Yeah. So I don't want to leave sounding like, all is lost. But however, before I come to my hopes, just a fact check that things are not as great as they should have been, right? I mean, things are not going anywhere where it should be, because very safe, secure environments for people are also becoming unsafe, are also becoming toxic, are also becoming unhealthy. And then we just constantly hear of excuses. We don't see government action. Just a place where you've come from. Everyone knows what's happened in the hospital. Nothing's really happening. Cases are getting closed. And this, I mean, anyone who reads the issue knows that this doesn't even make sense. Like, why did we even let this happen, right? So there's one at the government level, there's one at the institutional level, which we spoke about earlier. And then at the individual level, like, what do we do as individuals when we see inappropriate behavior? Because we always say, okay, we saw this, but let the police do something. Or we saw this, let somebody else do something. Or we saw two people having a fight, or maybe it's a personal issue. But no, the moment it's come into a public space, it's become your issue as much. So how much of ownership and responsibility are we taking is really, really critical. And the moment we take that, I think many of the other things will fall in place. But addressing your question of how I feel very hopeful. Not hopeful about my generation or even the generations after mine, but of the youth now, because we've given them, I'm sure my generation's given them such a insane, horrible, shitty world to inherit, and put so much of, burden on them, whether it's about behavior, whether it's about patriarchy or the planet. We've just given them lots of shit to deal with, but they seem to be in this what's there to lose mode, right? Whether and all the most wonderful movements of questioning governance, questioning protocol, questioning policy are all anchored by youth. So I feel very hope, and because they have very limited things to lose. It's my generation that has everything that we built for ourselves, and we're so scared to lose everything and our reputations. But youngsters have very little that they've got from us, and therefore they feel they have very little to lose. And they're so woke about knowing things, about knowing right from wrong, not shying away from talking about it, and not shying away from being torchbearers as well, right? So I feel very hopeful, therefore, that all is not lost, and we're letting the new generation of people who are in their early 20s right now to really sort of take on something. Of course, they don't have much of a choice, but it still leaves me with hope.
Yeah, when you say hope also, it just reminds me of how the Arjikar case, like I'm a person who's born and brought up in Calcutta, and I know that how the full city came in a standstill to actually make sure that the government was doing something. Like there were protests every day, all the doctors went on strike. It just showed that how much even if like how much we can do when we come together. So just wanted to know your perspective also, like what are like some of the pressing issues against violence against women in the workplace, especially in light of the Arjikar case.
Yeah, I think fundamentally it's the idea of, do women belong in the workplace, right? If corporates and CEOs of corporate realize that women actually contribute equally, if not more, to their organizations, just as much, and I'm not commodifying women here, but I'm actually throwing it back at the leadership. If they felt that women were important, equal contributors, they will treat us well. They will put
Yeah.
every single policy rule in the planet and follow everything in the rule book to make sure our lives are good, and they will encourage us. Today, because patriarchy perpetuates across all boardrooms, they don't see that value, right?
Mm.
And also, because all of these boardrooms are flushed with men, they don't want to see the value, right? There's one thing about genuinely not knowing, and the other thing is acting like you don't know. And this latter can never be corrected, right? It's an
Mm.
attitudinal problem. So, till people are okay with women leading, women everywhere, they're not going to do things that make it comfortable for us to thrive, right?
Yeah.
So even if you take the way judges are elected in our country, it's a collegium system, right? And that system basically has only men in it. So how do you
Yeah.
then expect chief justices and others to be women when only
Mm.
men keep hiring, and they'll only hire each other? So that system, if it's that way in the most superior system, which is our judiciary for every single law on human rights in the country, then how do we see anything, sort of having a rippling effect at any other level? So I think
Mhm.
first acceptance of women becomes really critical, and then the safety or the opportunity or the growth path or breaking the glass ceiling or everything is going to happen
Mm.
automatically. It didn't have to get done for men. It was just there, right? Nobody
Exactly.
had to make these very specific rules for men because they knew exactly what to do. So the men are not dumb, but they're
Yeah.
just plain dumb because of this whole
Mm.
thriving thing, right? And then the second thing is also about the women who actually get to these leadership roles. Like there'll be just one off woman in this
Yeah.
any board meeting, there'll be like 15 men and one woman. It becomes her responsibility to advocate more, right? You
Yeah.
have got that seat of privilege. So what are you doing with it? Like, why do you come back to control in a masculine way? Why can't you change your style and be more nurturing, to listen more,
Mm.
to take the voices that are not in that boardroom, be that
Mm.
advocate for those voices? I think that also is not happening enough. We talk a lot about it. We know it's the right thing to do. But when
Yeah.
we go into that room, we know we need to hold our seat. And so we just end up like listening and nodding.
Yes.
And that needs to change as well. So these two attitudes need to change. And I feel largely the rest can follow.
Absolutely. That's actually very insightful and thought-provoking. I mean, just as you were saying it, I was just like running it in my own head. And I was thinking of how I can think of at least 3 to 4 examples, and it is just so hidden and ingrained that it is like we will never think that it is away from the normal, right? It has just been
Mm,
so normalized and so conditioned in us. And I think that is part of the problem. So
yes.
thank you so much for that insight. Honestly, it has been pretty thought provoking. So, finally, a question that I would like to ask our guest. What do you think is the biggest way that we can make a ripple of change throughout the society?
I think I would say embody that change, right?
Yeah.
And in our work, in the context of safety, it would be an active bystander. Intervene when you see something inappropriate, whether it's in your workspace, whether it's at home or in a public space. It all starts with us. Thank you.
That's amazing. Now, I'd like to throw this question out to all our audience. If you have something